1 Kings, second chapter, beginning with the first verse. Now the days of David drew nigh, that he should die. And he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, and his commandments, and his judgments, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself. That the Lord may continue his word, which he spake concerning me, saying, If thy children take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth, with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail thee, said he, a man on the throne of Israel. Now these are the dying words of King David to his son. Now a while back I preached on this a little bit, the idea of last words and how we seem to really put a lot of importance in that. You know, it's in movies and books and all the mythologies of what someone's last words were. And that's because if you find yourself, God willing, in a position where you're able to say goodbye to your loved ones here on earth in a way that you're able to impart them with advice or with something important that you want to share, that means a lot. In this situation, King David, he's found himself in that situation where he knows that his time has come, and he's sharing with his son, who is to take the throne, his important last words. He decides that the most important thing to share, to pass on, his legacy, it's the one thing above all else that he needs to pass on to his son. Keep the charge of the Lord thy God. Walk in his ways, keep his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, his testimonies. And he says, if you do this, you and everyone after you will prosper. Now that, I believe, is the duty of every father here on earth. Is to pass that charge along to his children. To follow the Word of God. Follow his commandments. And if you do, you'll prosper. Not just here on earth, because as we talked about before, a lot of the rules in the Bible against sin are also just good rules for living. If you do this, you won't die. If you do this, you will live a longer life. If you do this, you will be healthy. But beyond that, if you do this, you will prosper in the afterlife. You follow God's law. And above all, accept his Son, and you will find salvation. And Proverbs 22, the 22nd proverb. I think here it makes that a little more clear. In the 6th verse of the 22nd chapter, it's a verse that we've probably heard several times, not just in studying the Bible, but even in popular culture. Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. Seems pretty simple when you think about it. Saying, teach a child when he's young, and when he's old, he will do what he was taught when he was young. It seems like a very basic concept. But it's something that I fear is not always followed. And I'm sure it's something over generations that we've dealt with as humans in different societies and different levels, but it seems like my generation and maybe before that, there's this kind of movement or notion that kids will grow up and decide for themselves. I talk to a lot of people my age who are already parents, some of teenagers already, and I talk to them about how they've raised their children in faith. Some of those people don't practice religion. Some of them are in homes with mixed religions where parents were raised differently, and there seems to be this increasing trend of I'm not going to tell my child how to worship God or what religion to follow. I'm going to let him make his own decision. When he grows up, he can decide what he wants to do. And it extends beyond, religion and worship, all the way to the point of people saying they should let their children decide whether or not they're a boy or a girl. And it seems to keep going in that direction. I think people have forgotten or are forgetting the purpose of a parent, purpose of a father, and purpose of a mother. And that is to raise a child. I was watching a documentary the other day about, I can never remember if they're alligators or crocodiles, but it was in Africa. And I think there were alligators there. I think that the crocodile we have on this side of the world. Anyway, this particular species of alligator that they were talking about, it laid its eggs and it's very protective. The mother and the father both are very protective of the eggs, making sure that no predators can get to them and eat their babies before they're hatched. But then once they're hatched, they lay the eggs on the shore, and once they hatch, the mother goes and puts the babies into her mouth and then swims out into the river, opens her mouth and releases the babies. And that's the last contact that parent ever has, aside from, I guess, maybe running into them in the future as an adult. But they don't raise their children after they've hatched. They let them go, and the babies go on and they make their little nests to hide out on their own until they get big enough to compete in the river. And humans are not like that. If a human left a helpless baby, infant, alone, it would die. We're just not designed that way. God did not design us in that fashion. The baby has to be fed, taught how to act, taught how to stand up, taught how to walk. Some of those things are done by teaching, telling. We teach them language. Some of it is just done by imitation. Like I said, when you read Proverbs 22:6, it says, train your children. It seems like a very simple concept. The Hebrew, I looked up, it's Hanak, I think is how you say it. Which means to train or to dedicate or to inaugurate. So they kind of use that word means not just to train as in to teach, but to dedicate. Now that's a little bit stronger of a word than just teach. It's not just teach your children well, which is an excellent proverb that we all repeat as well, but it's train up a child in the way that he should go. It means to teach and to dedicate. That means if you ingrain those teachings so deeply in a child at a young age, then it's at the foundation. It's at their core. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. I'm going to talk a little bit later about how that's not always the case, that someone will not depart from something that they were taught when they were young. But it's always there to return to. So what does the Bible say about that? What are we to do as a father, or just as parents in general? And again, when I say this to you, I know everybody in this room is already past the point of raising infants. I hope that I remember these lessons when the time comes for me to be a father. But these are also things that we can think about in our relationship with God. With God as our Father. As well as just being an example to younger people. Colossians chapter 3, beginning with the 21st verse. Now here, Paul has been giving instructions on how to have a good Christian household, how everybody in the household should behave. Here in the 21st, well, first and the 20th, it says, "Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord." And the 21st verse says, "Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged." Now, in another English translation, which I look to a lot of times, it gives a little context there to the words used. It says, "Fathers, do not provoke or irritate or fret your children. Do not be hard on them or harass them, lest they become discouraged and sullen, morose, feel inferior, frustrated." That is essentially, it's saying, do not break their spirit. And that comes out of the Greek that was used, erethizo, something, some kind of pronunciation along those lines, which the closest translation that we have, I guess, is to stir up. And it's used in the Greek the way that we in English would use stirring up or arousing to anger. Provoke is the most simplest word, and that's used in the King James. To irritate or incite. So what it's saying there is, fathers, don't break your children's spirit. To the point where they become discouraged. Now, provoke in the English, Webster defines that as to call forth a feeling or an action, to stir up purposely, as in provoking a fight, or to incite to anger. As to arouse to a feeling or an action. Now in Ephesians, the 5th chapter, Ephesians 5:28. Now here it's giving a similar another letter from Paul, where he's giving similar advice to another group of people. Again, giving instructions on how everyone should behave in a Christian household. Beginning with the 28th verse of the 5th chapter. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband. Moving on to the 6th chapter. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So again, it uses the same language there. here, the Greek word parogizo, something like that, as he used, which again was a word that was meant to provoke to anger or to exasperate. So, in the other verse, it's saying, we used the English, I guess, in both. We broke it down to just provoke. But in the other verse, it's saying, don't stir up, don't arouse to anger, don't break the spirit. And here it's saying, don't exasperate, don't wear them down and break their spirit. So the idea that I get from this so far is that we are to, from a very early stage, instill a foundation in our children, a strong foundation that they can return to. And if we have that, they will not turn away from it. And in reinforcing that, we're not to provoke our children to turn away from us, basically. Not to break their spirit to the point where they're not willing to listen to their father, where they have reason to be frustrated or turn away from their father. I see that as very difficult advice to follow when we are all humans and we are imperfect. I think that every father who is actually acts as a father, that is, there are plenty of people out there that produce children that don't stick around to be a father or do what they're supposed to. But the people that are there, the fathers who actually take on the role of the father, I think they all have the hopes and desires to do the best job that they can, to raise a child the best that they can. And hopefully that's raising them in Christ and faith with the church, with that foundation that we're talking about. But undoubtedly, because we are humans, we are imperfect, we will fail our children. We cannot always be the best of anything. We cannot always be the best Christians. We cannot always be the best children. We cannot always be the best parents. So how is it that we are expected as fathers, or again just as parents in general, to ensure that our children do not become exasperated, frustrated, broken spirit, to the point where they turn away from the teachings that we instill upon them? And the answer to that, I think, is illustrated in the 4th chapter of John. Turn to John 4 and the 46th verse. So Jesus came again into Cana of Galilee, where he made the water wine, and there was a certain nobleman, whose son was sick, at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus was come out of Judea into Galilee, he went unto him and besought him that he would come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Then said Jesus unto him, Except ye see signs and wonders, ye will not believe. The nobleman saith unto him, Sir, come down ere my child die. Jesus saith unto him, Go thy way, thy son liveth. And the man believed the word that Jesus had spoken unto him, and he went his way. And as he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, Thy son liveth. Then inquired he of them the hour when he began to amend. And they said unto him, Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him. So the father knew that it was at the same hour, and that which Jesus said unto him, Thy son liveth. And himself believed, and his whole house. And that's an example of a Roman soldier's conversion based on signs and wonders. But it's also an example of a father doing what was necessary to save his son.
Yes.
It was outside of this father's power to save his son's life. And so what did he do? He turned to Jesus. He turned to the Son of God. He asked for healing. Now the lesson there, aside from, like I said, it's an example of somebody, a Roman soldier, not just a non-Christian, but a Roman soldier being converted through signs and wonders. It's also an instruction on what to do as a father. How are we to act as fathers to our sons when we are imperfect? We are to turn to God. We are to be fathers persevering in prayer for our children. We are to bring our children to God's attention. I have in my line of work, which I talk to you all about quite a bit, I see a lot of examples of different types of relationships between family members. You wouldn't believe how often I am contacted by mothers of full-grown men, sometimes in their 50s even, and a mother begging me for help. Now, often in situations where I run into and dealing with people who often have been in trouble their whole adult life, it's pretty common in my experience, like most people would assume. I think the stereotype is often true that people in that situation didn't usually come from a good upbringing. Maybe they didn't have both of their parents around, they didn't have a father to instill these values in them. Some of them didn't have a mother to show them what it was like to be cared for. Some of them were raised in foster care, bounced around. Some of them were raised in gangs. Not just that they weren't taught how to be a good member of society, but they were actually taught how to do the opposite from an early age. And I hear a lot of deputies, actually, bailiffs in the courtroom, they'll talk about that, and a lot of times correctional officers, especially with young people, but even sometimes people in their 40s or 50s. They get the feeling that they're the only father figure some of these people have ever had. They've never had any discipline except by the state of California or the county sheriff. And the only way that some of these people can be made to follow the rules is to be ordered around like a child sometimes. And that's because they didn't receive that early foundation. There are also a lot of examples I run into, though, where there are people in that situation who have great